Bedinger, and I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. And today I have a tips and tricks video for you. I thought it might be useful. Some of the material I have, this is all about using punches. And using punches can really be very gratifying. But there are times you pick up a punch and you have a sentiment and your sentiment is too long, or it looks funny because your sentiment is real short, but you like the shape of the punch. So I'm going to show you how to lengthen, how to shorten. I'm going to tell you how to sharpen it, and sometimes the tab on your punch, I'll bring one up so you can see it. This piece here falls out. So how do you get it back in? And then I'm going to talk about the care of your punch, and we're going to have a bunch of examples, how to use the punch to make an interesting border, how to, and have you ever had your punch get stuck? And some different ways to manipulate your punch, because I know some of my customers have arthritis in their hands and it's difficult for them to use a punch, and so I'm going to show you a couple of ways that makes it a little bit simpler. Okay, let's just get started. Okay, so I thought one of the punches that would be easy to work with is this one. This one is called the Timeless Label Punch. And when you get your punches from Stampin' Up!, they're real easy to store. In fact, they actually stack pretty well. They sort of fit on top of one another. There's usually the center of this piece fits over the raised portion of this piece, and so they stack pretty well. The first thing is when you're doing punching, and I'm using blue paper, hopefully you'll be able to see a little bit more clearly what I'm doing. To stamp out this punch, most of us have a tendency to pick up the stamp and put our paper in and do our punching like this. Well, that's fine, but have you ever had one pinch you? That hurts. So one of the things that you can do is lay it flat. Let me snip some of this end off so it'll fit in there again. To lay it flat and use the leverage of both of your hands if you have trouble squeezing those punches. And so there you can get a punch done. Now, the thing on this item here, this plastic piece, and this is the locking mechanism that locks to put your punch in locked down mode for storage, and then you just push this little thing back. Well, if you get it a little askew, and I probably wouldn't be able to make one come loose just because I want to, the thing I want you to do is turn your punch upside down here and kind of take a look at it, because this piece has the flattish end. I'll bring that up maybe so you can see it. Let me get my pierce tool. The flattish end of this mechanism is towards the front, and if this ever pops out, the intuitive thing to do would be to have the flush end of this go to the inside, because you think about it locking, but it is exactly the opposite. If it ever comes out, you want this flush end here to the front or the bottom of your punch. And basically this is a very heavy-duty plastic, and if it comes loose, you put it in place and you literally force it back in, and eventually it contracts and it goes back in. So if you've had one of those come loose, the other thing I've had happen is where I've got paper or something stuck in here and I cannot get the thing to open back up again. And I know it seems awful, but the thing to do is go to a heavily carpeted area and from about, maybe mid-thigh, literally drop it. And 9 times out of 10, it'll spring itself wide open again and eject any paper or anything that's holding it from operating. Okay, so let's talk about maintaining this. So I have a couple of things here to show that. And the first is sharpening a punch, and I have some heavy-duty foil here. And if you put your foil in your punch, and I have this folded over once, and you punch and then remove your paper here, or your foil, and do it again, literally 3 or 4 times, 4 or 5 times, your punch gets sharp again. And you can tell when you're punching something and the paper's starting to look a little frayed along the edges and it's not quite smooth, then it's probably time to use some foil here and sharpen those edges up a little bit. And there, I've done it 4 times. I'll probably do it 1 more here, just for illustrations purposes. And then again, you don't have to do it very often, but when it starts to look a little frayed, then certainly you can run it through the foil and get it to, and there you go. That's what you've got that you've used up. And then I take my foil and I cut off some of the pieces here, so it's easy to store without making a big mess. And I put it away in a drawer, and it's ready for me to use again next time. So the other thing about care on a punch is to use some wax paper to lubricate the punch. And this technique is exactly the same as using the foil paper for sharpening. Sometimes this needs to get, it doesn't hurt your punch and it doesn't hurt your paper, but it seems to make things punch a little bit more smoothly. If you have one that is a little tough to do, using wax paper, and again, I think I folded mine 4 times here, and just getting the paper out is as tough as doing it. But putting this through a couple of times so that your punch edges have a little bit of this wax treatment on it does seem to make a difference in making it punch a little bit more smoothly. And that's all there is to that. Now, you want to make sure you get all of your pieces out of there. And again, I will snip this off. I don't know if this is even much to save, but for the next time I think I need to do that, I can lubricate the edges here and make that a little bit easier to punch. And so that's it on that kind of thing. Now, I'm going to use this punch to show. Now, this punch, when your punch is cut out, let me see here. Let me find my little ruler here. So this piece of paper is 1 1/8 inch wide when it's punched out. So if you have a piece of paper then that you want to extend or lower, you cut that piece of paper to the 1 1/8 inch, so that the paper will slide into the punch. So what we're going to do here in this case is punch this end out. Then I'm going to stick this end back into the punch again here, and providing I've cut it to the right width, it should go right in. And let's say I had a very small sentiment, but I really like the look of that punch. Well, all you have to do is move it to the length that you want it, and look at that. That's the standard size that you cut out with this punch. And then look what you can do for backing. You can put it on another piece of something else and make it a small rim or a large rim and get that look of an edged punch punched out piece. Now you can get the same thing to make it longer. So what we're going to do is put this edge back in the punch here, and I'm going to punch one end, and then I'm going to put it back in this end and pull it all the way up. And let's say I had a very long sentiment that I was trying to get. We have one, this Happy Thanksgiving, which I love the font on. Look how long that is. Well, nothing we have is going to fit that. So what you might do is kind of measure this along, realizing that you'd have to have a surface that was almost 3 3/4 to make that fit. Well, taking this all the way down here to here and making that kind of a punch, then you could stamp this on here and it would fit perfectly. So you can make them both shorter and longer. And let's say that I wanted to back this one. All you ever really have to do is cut this in half, and most of you know these kinds of tricks, but it's good for a reminder, and put a little bit of snail on the back of your punch end here, and put a little bit of trim on the edge, and do the same thing on the other edge here, and there we've got absolutely the nicest little trim. And if it's not perfect, all we have to do is snip it off and make it so. So that is shortening and lengthening. All right, and let's see, look at my notes here. Oh, another thing that happens to us is we have a rather small piece of paper, say something this size, and it's perfect for the sentiment we want, but I'll never get it in here to fit and to go in here, and I don't want to waste those kinds of pieces of paper. In fact, I cut that a little bit short. So one of the things I do with my scraps is I make little strips like this all the time, and they're 1/2 inch long, and whatever the length of your scrap is, and these make handles. So you put a little bit of snail on the back of your piece that you want to punch, and you add a handle onto it, and then getting it in here and getting it centered is a piece of cake. So there you go. Now this little piece took a little piece of my handle off. That's fine, but there's my punched out piece, and there's my piece that I punched out from, and I keep my little handles handy, and I'll use them over and over and over again until they are too short to use, and then I toss them and use a few more. So that is another thing you can do with your punch. Now, you can also go on Pinterest and or YouTube and look at punch art. There are some incredibly talented people that have turned a simple punch into an amazing array of shapes and sizes and different kinds of animals and so on and so forth. Sometime when you have some time, go on and look at those, because there's some wonderful inspiration there. Okay, another thing I wanted to talk about was, and this includes both your stamps and your punches, and let's say that the daisy punch is a perfect example of that. Let me take the Daisy Lane stamp set here. Whether you're punching the larger daisy or the smaller daisy, one of the things to figure out is how your punch is going to line up with your stamp, so that you can make sure that you have an easy time of getting your images punched out once you've made them. For the daisy, for instance, the daisy punch, I have the larger daisy here, so we'll go ahead and use it. because I have the other one set up for a card class tomorrow. So let me grab a larger block here and mount my larger daisy on here, ink that up, and what we know is this daisy punch is set up with the petals vertical. So if you stamp it like this on your piece of paper, you're going to have to twist and turn this in order to get this to punch your daisy. You're going to have to, it's going to go in, and you're going to be looking for how you're going to line that up, and see that corner isn't going to allow you to get down there. So one of the tricks is learning how your stamps that have punches associated with them are going to punch out. This daisy, I know, my label isn't on here very straight, punches, it sets up vertically. So there's my vertical daisy. And now I can come straight in, line up my daisy, and it's going to work every single time. And some items are even more challenging than that. So in the cases where you've got a different kind of shape that has a punch to it, like say the dog or the cat, to mark on the top of the item where you want the top of the stamp to be by putting a mark on your, take a permanent marker, and for instance, if this needs to be the top every time, to go ahead and put a mark on it. So you know when you put that one on your block, you put it on with that item right at the top. And then you've got a fighting chance, because some petals and some flowers, for instance, over the years have not punched out straight up and down, or there is a specific way it punches out. So by marking your punches or your stamps, then you know that every single time if you put that petal at the top, you're going to be ready to go. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to show you is just a little trick for getting a more decorative border on your card projects. And what I did was I took this piece of paper that was a card base, and I used this punch. Now this punch is called the Artisan Punch, and you know how sometimes in the catalog we have those beautiful tins that they sell. Well, I almost always get them because I love the tins. And when you do that, there's often a small punch in there. Well, now this one would be a perfect candidate to make longer or shorter. Now this punch is 1 1/4 inches wide. So I cut a strip that is 1 1/4. Let me grab it here. This one is actually 1 3/8 to go in this punch. But so this is one you could lengthen or shorten because it's got a really pretty little border on the edge here, and that would be kind of fun to have. But how I used this one was to take a measure, and let's say that I wanted 1 inch off the edge or 1/2 inch off the edge to have some sort of a decorative border. So all you really need to do is put something on your grid paper here and mark 1/2 inch. Let's just do this one 1/2 inch here, and put your ruler down at that 1/2 inch mark here, and make a small pencil line here so you know where your 1/2 inch is. And then you can use your punch to come along here. What I'm going to do is show you, I'm putting the lines on my card right on the corners of this punch. So I'm going to put that so that those edges are right on that line and punch. Then I'm going to move it over and do that again. And if you have a punch that has a real interesting edge, you can get all kinds of different edge borders on here. And I didn't start this on one end or the other, so mine's kind of cattywampus in the middle, but it'll work if you just keep putting it along that edge. It'll give you that final border that you want here. And it just depends on what kind of a punch you have that gives you that border. And what I do with mine is I take my scissors, and see how I've got my little pencil mark still showing there. So I trim across there to trim off my pencil marks or erase them. But this allows you to have a nice even edge on that. There we go. And so you now have an interesting little border that you can put on your card to make things a little bit more interesting. And it just depends on what kind of punches you have in your stash. You can do just about anything. Anyway, that's it for me today. I want to review from my notes here. I showed you, the last thing is when you're punching, almost always to do it upside down so you can see your sentiment. For instance, on something like this, if you have a sentiment on here, you want to be able to see it and make sure that it is centered. And that way it doesn't matter how you stamped it. You can get it centered on your punch. And saving strips like this to have in your stash, you know, in any color is probably worthwhile, just to be able to put some sentiments. Or if you stamp something on a card and you're not happy with it, you can always create a label and put it over to correct an error. So we talked about doing a punch this way in your hand. We talked about doing it this way and applying pressure. We talked about creating little handles for smaller pieces of paper. We talked about how to make a punch both longer and shorter than it was originally intended. And there's the standard size. And then we talked about how to sharpen the blade on your punch here and how to use wax paper if one is getting a little ragged. We talked about if your stamp gets stuck, to take it over and drop it on a heavily carpeted area and it'll spring itself open. And we talked a little bit about marking your stamp so they align well with your stamp and your punch so that you get a good piece. One last thing here. I'm going to stick this label, this longer label, in here, into this, and do one more little trick that's kind of fun. Put it into the end of the punch and get it right towards the end, and then punch it. And what you end up getting is some little pieces that you can make into tiny slivers. She used it to make brackets to put on the side of cutout words. And you can make your brackets be any size, but instead of using a punch, to use brackets on either side of some words that you've made. So again, lots of things you can do with your punch. So thank you again so much for stopping by my YouTube channel today. I do so appreciate it. And if you don't already have a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, I'd love to be your demonstrator. My prize draw for the month of September is the bundle of your choice from the holiday catalog. And all you have to do to be in the drawing is to make an order on my website, www.lbedinger.stampinup.net. And you can get to it through my blog, www.inkingenuity.com. So again, that's it for me, and I'll be back soon with more cards, more projects, and more tips. Bye!